Does anyone remember when kind of the first formation of the Roman Empire is at least attributed? Does anyone remember when the first formation of the Roman Empire comes along? What's going to literally define all of the New Testament? Does anyone know when that took place? So tradition tells us that it was right about the time of when Samaria was taken away captive, when the northern tribe was taken away captive. And literally the tradition goes that two twins, Romulus and Remus, who were nursed by a she-wolf, founded the city of Rome on the Tiber River in 753 BC. Now, archaeology has helped us out for decades and decades, and they have found that there's been settlements in Rome in what they believe as far back as 1000 BC. But that's the traditional story. The twins, Romulus and Remus, formed it in 753 BC. So again, Rome is, when you think about world empires, and especially world empires as it relates to the biblical world, Rome is a very, very late newcomer. However, it does last a long time. So if it's formed in 753, I mean, even if you give that would be fairly late compared to what we would speculate now. How long does it last? How long does the Roman Empire last? And this gets into church history, and me and the young men went into this, but we won't go into this, at least not anytime soon. How long does the Roman Empire last? The general date that's given is what? Does anyone know? 476 AD. And if that is the case, you have an empire that essentially lasts how long? Roughly 1,200 years. If it's founded in the 700s and it lasts all the way until the 400 AD, and then you throw in some change, you have a kingdom that's somewhere around the 1,200 year mark. So Rome lasted a long time, but it was a relatively late comer. Now, in your material, you'll notice that I skipped from its founding, I skipped a lot into the future, essentially into the time of the Maccabean revolt, because that's when the historical foundations of what we care about so much began to happen. And that's with the Punic Wars. So Rome is fighting Carthage in the Punic Wars, and there's a series of them. They last a long time. They last decades. Where was Carthage? Where was Carthage? Does anyone know? Italy is pretty much in the middle of the Mediterranean Ocean as far as east to west is concerned. Carthage is south. So Carthage is actually on the shore of northern Africa. So Rome and Carthage fight these Punic Wars, and particularly in 146 BC, Carthage was finally destroyed by the Romans. That's when Rome gains control of the Western Mediterranean, and as it gains control of the Western Mediterranean, then it looks to the east. And of course, what lays east of Rome? Greece. And what else? Eventually it gets you to Jerusalem, exactly. We had mentioned, or I'd mentioned earlier, I don't know how many times I'd mentioned it, but the Romans entered the land of Palestine, what is referred to kind of as a misnomer, but what is referred to as the Holy Lands. Do you remember what year the Romans enter the land of Palestine? Pompey enters it in 63 BC. So from this point in the Punic Wars, when Carthage is destroyed, about 146, so you've got only around 80 years as they put more and more expansion, both westward and eastward, until you finally reach the point of them entering into the Holy Land. So you can see the map up here. It was a wide, extensive kingdom. And eventually, as they gain control of everything that we're familiar with, Macedonia, Corinth, Achaia, it gains control of all of the Asia Minor, and then finally gains control of all of the land of Palestine. And you can see it goes even further eastward than just Palestine, but still they gain control of it. Now, just for us to kind of understand in and of itself, from the very beginning of the Roman Empire, it began as what? What did it begin as? It was actually ruled, most of the time we don't realize this, it was actually ruled by 7 kings. So in its founding, you go all the way back to the 700s BC, it started its life as being reigned by a series of 7 kings. And then once the 7th king was finally finished, they established what is now commonly known as a what? What do we call that term? What kind of country do we live in? We live in a democracy is usually what we call it. Is that a technically accurate term? You need to go a little further. What does it mean when we say that we live in a democracy? What is our form of government? It's a representative republic. Charles is right. It's a representative republic. That's what Rome came to exist as. So from the time the ending of these 7 kings, which ended about in the 500s, all the way until what I'm going to talk to you about in just a second, it was a representative republic. Of course, then it became a what? Then it became a true empire. So let's just trace this just for a little bit. Rome transitioned from a republic into an empire with what's called triumvirates. Triumvirate. So what was a triumvirate? What was a triumvirate? Does anyone know what a triumvirate was? It's like a partnership with how many people? With 3 people. It's like a 3-tiered partnership. The first triumvirate was Julius Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. The same Pompey who was a general in 63 BC, who entered and kind of conquered the land of Palestine. It didn't give a whole lot of resistance, but he conquered the land of Palestine. Now, just a few years later, about 12 or so years later, he's forming one part of this first triumvirate. Now, things began to... The problem with 3 is you're always the odd man out. So things began to get a little bit heated between Caesar and Pompey. Julius Caesar emerged victorious. He assumed the role of dictator, and they what? They assassinated him. On what famous day? Which, I did not design this, was actually yesterday. The famous Ides of March was yesterday. So Julius Caesar was killed 2,099 years ago, I think, in Rome because he had taken the role of dictator. So there is a second triumvirate that's formed. And that second triumvirate has Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. This triumvirate actually lasted for a decent amount of time. It had 2 5-year periods, so for 10 years. But eventually, things began to deteriorate within it. Lepidus was kicked out, and Octavian and Mark Antony went to battle. And Mark Antony had an ally. Who was his ally? Cleopatra. So Mark Antony and Cleopatra, the movie with Elizabeth Taylor and who was her husband? Maybe more than once. Richard Burton. Back in the, I think it was before I was alive. This movie that kind of told the story of this, not only this love affair, but them going up against Octavian and being defeated. So that's what the movie was about. So Mark Antony and Cleopatra go up against Octavian. They lose in the Battle of Actium. I have mentioned some of these battles as we've gone along as being battles that are so epic because they're marking the change of world power. The Battle of Actium is one of those battles that if you look back in the history of the world, it's rated as one of the most important because it's the battle that essentially changed a Roman Republic to a Roman Empire. So Octavian now is the sole ruler of Rome. Octavian becomes who? Augustus, the first, what? The first Roman emperor. Augustus or Octavian actually did not want to, the Senate was willing to give him all of these powers for life. He had offered to transfer control back to the Senate before his appointment. The Senate declined, and that essentially made him the first Roman emperor. And this happened in 27, or this happened in 31, and then it was kind of ratified in 27. So 10 years prior to this, we have Herod the Great. So kind of marking Herod the Great just a little bit, Herod the Great was born in 74 BC. So while all of the first and the second triumvirates are kind of going along, Herod the Great is born. So just to kind of consider this just a little bit, if you can see it, this is kind of the family tree of Herod the Great. Up here we have Mattathias. At the very top is Mattathias. Who was Mattathias? He led the Maccabean revolt. So you've got all of his sons. His sons were all people who led the Maccabean revolt. But as you come down all the way through, right down here at the very bottom on the right, you have Herod. So Herod, as he connects with the family tree, he wasn't directly related to Mattathias, but he's going to come into that family, and I'll bring that up in just a little bit. Herod the Great's actual family tree looks a little bit like this. Of course, Herod the Great, starting up with here, he's going to have multiple wives. That's how he enters into the family of the Maccabean revolt. That's how he enters into the family of Mattathias. He's not a very good husband, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. But some of the most important people that come through his lineage, we have Herod Agrippa the first, we have Herod Antipas, Agrippa the second, we also have Agrippa the third, which is a little bit beyond New Testament times. But all of these people who are well known to us in the account of the New Testament comes through Herod the Great. And that's why he becomes such a extremely important person, not just in Roman history, but for us in New Testament history. And again, once we start the harmony of the Gospels in the next couple of weeks, we're going to enter right into Herod the Great very, very quickly. Now, ethnically, what was Herod the Great? What was Herod the Great? We've mentioned it before. What was Herod the Great? So he wasn't a Jew. What was he? Going south, he was an Idumean. Idumean is the Greek way to say Edomite. So who were the Edomites? They were descendants of Esau. And they also happened to be favorites of the Jews or enemies of the Jews? Enemies of the Jews. Now, Herod's father, who was Antipatris, Herod's father was Antipater, and I brought him up before. Herod's father married a Nabatean princess. And that's how Herod kind of had the Nabatean blood and also had the Idumean blood in his lineage. Him becoming a Nabatean then raises all kinds of, again, touching into some very well-known parts in the world. This means that he comes from a region of the world of the Nabateans which had Petra as its capital city. So Petra, this is kind of the desert area that's around Petra, and Petra is actually well known to a lot of people. Petra was a what? How would you, if you know what Petra is, how would you describe it? It's a very rocky kingdom. In fact, this way is the entrance into the canyon where Petra exists. Okay, it's called the Siq, S-I-Q. And it's very, very narrow, and it's very, very tall. You read the book of Edom, and it talks about the Edomites are the people who live up in the what? The eagle's nests. Why? Because they lived up in these regions here of these high cliffs. So you pass through this area, and you get to Petra. Probably the most famous, one of the most famous buildings, actually, I think I could say, in the world is this one. What is it? Do you know? Lynn, you're wanting to say it. So tell us what it was. It was a treasury. It was a treasury. In pop culture, Lynn, what was it? It was the exterior of the final scene of Indiana Jones and the Final Crusade. So in the movie, when they went through this entrance, it had all of this, ancient booby traps that finally got you back to the Holy Grail, this Grail room. I've actually stood inside this building, and let me tell you, it's not that imaginative. It literally is a stone room. Now, the neat thing for me was not that it kind of blew all of my expectations. It was very unexciting. It was a stone room. However, we had probably 40 or 50 Christians, and once you got inside this stone room, when you sang in it, it's in. What does carpet and padded pews do to a room? It dampens it. So when you're in a room full of nothing but hard surfaces, it amplifies sound. It makes sound very live. So you get 40 or 50 Christians into literally just essentially a stone cubicle room, and you sing something like Amazing Grace. It's pretty neat. Not very exciting inside it. However, it was a treasure, one of the most important buildings in the world, one of the most recognized buildings in the world. This was the region of the world that Herod the Great was from. But Herod the Great was not a great person. Why do you think he was called Herod the Great? Because of what he accomplished. And we'll go through that before class is over. So Herod the Great, along with, and this was mainly his father Antipater, and we did discuss just for a moment what all Antipater did. Antipater kind of loved to be a power player, especially in the Syrian reign of Palestine, back in the times that were just pre-Maccabean time and just after the Maccabean revolt. Antipater, his father, was a power player. So Antipater loved to be in the geopolitical situation of the day. And Antipater and Herod the Great both ended up being incredible opportunists. What does it mean to be an opportunist? You take advantage of the situation. Whatever side is winning, that's the side that you're on. So Antipater, along with his son Herod, eventually ended up, because of always sliding to the side that was winning, Herod the Great eventually became the king of the whole region of Judea, and ended up, as far as his opportunistic ways, ended up being highly rewarded for it. But he wasn't a great person. So let me tell you just how great he was. He becomes, again, affiliated with the whole Hasmonean. This is Mattathias and all his sons, the whole Hasmonean line of rulers. He marries the granddaughter of Aristobulus II. We talked about him. Her name was Mariamne II. He also married the granddaughter of Hyrcanus II. And she was the first one was Mariamne the first, and then he married Mariamne the second. So before we kind of talk about them just for a second, what was Herod the Great known for? Maybe this was the reason why he was great. What was Herod the Great maybe known beyond anything for this? And I don't mean something negative. I mean it's something positive. What was Herod the Great known for? He was known for, actually Charlie's exactly right, but in a larger sense, he was simply known as a prolific builder. A prolific builder. I mean, guys, he built everything. And I want to show you some of the pictures of what he built. He builds, again, as this, I think here, this is one of the regions of Petra. But Herod's building program, so let me just kind of show you this. The area that's in kind of the orange is all of Herod's kingdom. And you're not going to probably be able to make this out, but all of these up here, all of the little, let's see, which ones is it? Yes, all of these little squares up here are going to be Herod's building areas. And if you're not close enough to see it, the map is just full of squares. I mean, he built all over the place. I've picked out some of the, not only some of the great ones, but some of the ones that apply to New Testament history so much. One place that I'll show you was Caesarea. And this was the Caesarea where Paul was in jail. So this was the Caesarea to the north, Caesarea Maritima. This was a city that was built by the sea. And as far as, ancient cities, it was just unbelievable. This is kind of a model that shows what it would have been like. But the ruins of Caesarea, even to this day, are pretty outstanding. One of the most outstanding parts of the ruins here, and you can see it over here to the right, about midway down the picture, was the theater. So in Caesarea, there was this amazing amphitheater that was built. And again, he was the one who did every bit of it. One of the great things that came from Caesarea, as far as recently is concerned, and I can't remember when this inscription was found. I think it was sometime back in the 60s. It was an inscription that was found in Caesarea that mentions Pilate. So this is the Pilate inscription. And it mentions Pilate. Who was Pilate? What was Pilate's whole reason for existing in the Gospels? What was he? He was the Roman governor of Judea. So this inscription mentions Pilate as the Roman governor of Judea. So what does that do for us as far as establishing the accuracy of the Bible? It verifies it. You know, again, and just kind of thinking about the lesson itself, these little pieces don't definitively prove that the Bible is real beyond a shadow of a doubt. But when you put this evidence together, it makes an overwhelming case that the Bible was a real book that could speak about accurately real places and describe people, and as it puts these people in their settings, like Pilate, it tells about it in an accurate way. So Caesarea Maritima, very, very famous. Another place that was very, very famous was Masada. Now, Masada is kind of outside of the realm of New Testament history. So does anyone know what was important about Masada? They made a movie about this. In fact, I think it's called Masada. It was a movie back maybe in the 60s or 70s. What was Masada? So we normally know of the great showdown between the Jews and the Romans as existing at what point in time? In 70 AD, when the Romans did what? Destroyed Jerusalem. But that wasn't the only problems that the Jews had with the Romans and vice versa. Beyond the New Testament times, I think it was in 135 BC AD, the Romans come and have to deal with the Jewish outbreak again, and the Jews fled to this fortress that Herod had built called Masada. And they made a stand there. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, dozens of Jews eventually ended up committing suicide instead of falling into the hands of the Romans. So again, made into a movie, very well known as far as Jewish history is concerned. Just not a lot of people know about it because it's outside of the New Testament times. And as you're looking down at Masada, this hilltop's not there, but it was created, it was built on the top of the mountain, and as you're looking down on it here, you can see all of the ruins. In fact, some of the places that they've actually recreated and rebuilt, as far as walking around in the city that was 2,000 years ago, it actually would have been, a very, very beautiful place. Another place that Herod built was Antipatris, I guess so. Antipatris. He made it in honor of his father. So Antipatris, another city, very, very well known, and not only well known as far as Herod's building programs are concerned, but relatively well preserved. So people can go and study this. And then just let me show you this place before we get to the temple. Macherus. Macherus was another mountaintop fortress. Now, Macherus was very important. Again, it's got ruins in it that's fairly well preserved. But Macherus kind of has a claim to fame. And does anyone know where it is or what it is? What Macherus' claim to fame would be. It was relatively far north, somewhere up in the region of the Sea of Galilee. But does anyone know what happened at Macherus? This is supposedly where John the Baptist was put in prison and beheaded. Okay? So this would have been, maybe the prison at Macherus would have looked perhaps very similar to a place like this. And then just finally today, of course, the real true claim to fame is the what? Is that temple. So Charlie, how long did it take to make this temple? They worked on it a grand total. It took them decades to make this. And the ironic part is it was finished just before what? Just before the Romans came and destroyed it. So they work on it somewhere in Jesus' time. They had been working on it for 46 years. And then it would be another 35 years or so until it's destroyed, which says that they'd worked on it for somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 years. And then it was just gone, just destroyed. So This is the model of it that's in Jerusalem. You can walk all around, not only the model of the temple, but the model of the old city. Some of the gates. This would be the western wall. And of course, the western wall is the only part of it that's still standing. So what do people do at the western wall now? Or the Wailing Wall. It's the western wall, but they call it the Wailing Wall. What do people do at it? They pray. They pray. If you see modern shots of Jerusalem now in the news, a lot of times they'll include the Wailing Wall. And every day, in particular, Orthodox Jews will come and pray at this wall. And what else will they do? If you'll watch carefully, and I've seen it in news report multiple times, they stick little prayers in the wall. And it's this original part, again, the only original part of Herod's temple that's left. So Herod the Great ends up being this absolutely unbelievable builder. But as far as a person is concerned, he's terrible. In fact, he's no better than a bunch of heathen kings that you would have read about in the Old Testament. One of the things that he does, I talked to you about Mariamne the First and Mariamne the Second, two of his wives from the Jewish Hasmonean dynasty. He kills both of them. Okay, so he kills both of them. He also kills one of the two of them's grandfather. He kills one of her brothers. He kills several of his own children, including the child that he had named after his own father, Antipater, 5 days before his own death. So, I mean, again, just a terrible person. But as far as we're concerned, as far as the New Testament is concerned, of course, what is Herod, in all of his wickedness, most known for? The killing of the children in Bethlehem. And again, we'll get the opportunity to study this a little bit more in depth. When Herod died in 4 BC, Herod dies in 4 BC. This is going to become important to us. When Herod dies in 4 BC, he left 3 of his sons, and they basically divided the kingdom into 3 parts. Philip, who had the area east of the Sea of Galilee. Antipas, who was given Galilee and Perea. Antipas was the one that Jesus called that fox in Luke chapter 13, verse 22, because he was the one who was denounced by John the Baptist. Then Archelaus, who got Judea. So Archelaus, who got Judea. When Joseph and Mary fled, Archelaus would have been the king. Okay, so from there we'll kind of look at now that lays in enough of the history of the Romans and of Herod the Great to kind of set the stage for what will come. Next time we're going to look at all of the sects of the Jews, talk about a little bit more, tiny bit more background, and then hopefully we'll be finished.